we're actually running concurrent to APFA right now. So they're actually, and they're heading into the third meeting next week, I think is the fourth meeting. So they're pretty far underway, and they're gonna take some of the feedback and recommendations this group creates
Right.
and incorporate that into any recommendations they make for APFA. More narrow and specific focus, which allows us to kind of work in a more expedited.
ECHO hovers over us.
It does. It heavily affects us. Today, as we get into it, we'll dig into a little bit of just kind of cursory understanding of what demographics and information that feeds into understanding Howard County. How do we define affordable? Just those basics. And then next week is the much meatier grind of APFO and development incentives and how those all relate to affordable. So I think today is more just setting the table of like, what does it mean to be affordable in Howard County? Which is a little bit more data specific.
And not just families. These people want to be on their own.
You can just like.
That is my experience. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm Mary.
Hi, Mary.
I work with Jess.
Okay.
Perfect, Jess.
I'm gonna do a sound check to see if Glenn and Chris can hear us.
Jennifer's here than usual. Right? Lisa. Jeff Brown up 5.
I did call him on. Excellence. That's a question.
Jeff Brown would qualify. Mary, are you working on Gateway?
I am. Yes.
Wow, so you've got.
You're
We are live streaming now. We're good.
I'm gonna tell him.
Okay. Did you send it? We're down a few, depends on the division. But I think we're mostly restaffed now in our Division of Comprehensive and Community. And then I think we've got some vacancies in our zoning division.
I just met Jeff Delmar first.
Oh.
Hey Jeff.
Hi there.
Paul Ravel.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, you haven't met in person?
No, not yet.
Email.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem, no problem. Well, I think there's a lot of work that you guys are doing that's really great.
Now that I have your email address, I will be back.
That's good, that's good.
I think I'll give everyone until 3.
Yeah, so yeah, Jeff's in our
5 minutes.
comprehensive and community.
Is that
planning
an
division.
extra penny?
So that's the team that does, that's the team that I worked with. I oversee that.
No, I got paid.
Resource conservation.
That one.
So comprehensive and community planning, we just, came off the general plan, we're running the gateway plan, and then there's a Route 1 tax credit program. Then there are a lot of different, what are called sustainable community designations throughout the county. That's right. So we manage, oversee that planning effort as well.
Just one.
And I know, they have to review any kind of ZRA for consistency with the general plan whenever they come through. So those are kind of
This
things
one's
that we
not again so far.
It can get very,
Yeah, we'd be
Busy.
busy with something else.
especially in that general plan. Still recovering.
Kind of happy with some of it,
Yeah,
because that was.
we're gonna have
Yeah.
a lot of work sessions with council.
Jeff, about sustainable communities. Demo thing.
The fund.
Church.
Yeah, it can be used for a variety of what's considered quote unquote capital. That's my background. I came from the state, in the Division of administering those programs and the Sustainable Communities Planning effort. So the Strategic Demolition Fund can be used for any kind of capital pre-development costs, so architectural and engineering drawing, site acquisition, site clearing, demolition, and other. Well, it's not going to be any feasibility studies, but you kind of got to, right, you got to convince them that you've got some real stuff. But it absolutely is all about trying to help people and local governments and the nonprofit organizations that are eligible to apply kind of get that pre-development money that you generally can't get elsewhere. That was the intent behind it.
We're working with.
Oh, okay.
The presentation is going to be coming on
On
that side.
Yeah.
I'm sort of sitting here so I can talk to both.
It's going to take 2 years.
And then can you quick reference?
Oh, right.
Just to get comfortable.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Right. Now, I don't know if in that case, you would have to find out who would be the eligible applicants. So only local, some nonprofit community development organizations are eligible applicants to that program. Yeah. So sometimes county governments act as a pass-through to nonprofit organizations. Okay.
Or enterprise in its huge structure has.
Oh, I know.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if they've ever, when I was there, I don't recall ever granting funds directly to enterprise, which is a little surprising because the state has granted those funds to plenty of other affordable housing developers, not developers. Right. So maybe they have started those funds, so they could potentially be an eligible applicant.
Yeah.
I just
I think we should.
Well,
Okay.
it's at least.
Yeah, I don't count it. That's the promo.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do have a list of the churches that are in the city's communities.
Okay.
I won't try to map
Oh, okay. Yeah, pen and paper. You ready?
Yeah, we're gonna wait for Kelly to join us. She's.
Okay.
Just kind of so everyone knows, we are currently live streaming, and then we will take the recording afterwards and trim out this chatter. Mostly so that, people don't have to wait for 10 minutes. We'll post it online. And we'll also be posting the presentation from today. And anyone who studiously looked at the website earlier today will notice that we did post the virtual binder material that was sent to you as well to the site.
Did you do an audio check online? Can they hear you okay?
I hope so. I'm gonna ask, I will pick out Grace, do you mind?
Yeah, I can barely hear you.
Barely?
Yep, right now I could hear you better than what you were saying just before the audio check.
Okay, I am a notorious soft talker in a way that microphones do not like it. So I will talk upward and project towards the ceiling, which is not an awkward thing to do at all. And all of that training. But if at any time you guys cannot hear the presentation or each other, please do not hesitate to chime in and let us know. We're waiting for one more member who had to quickly run out, and they'll be returning, and then we will get started. So thank you for everyone who was able to make it today. I know it's been difficult coordinating everyone's very busy schedules and trying to find a time that we're all available to meet. So we're going to try to do our best to meet as a group, get all the information out, and make sure that we're soliciting everyone's experience and input so that we can take that bundle together and create some good recommendations moving forward. And sorry to pick on you, Grace. You was the first name that popped up in the reel.
No worries.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get started whenever you're ready. One second here. Take this time to remind everyone to silence their phones, movie theater style. Yep, you should be good. All right. Welcome, everyone. As I said before, this is technically our first meeting of the Housing Affordability Working Group. I'm going to count our kickoff as more of a prologue. This is our chapter 1. So this is our first meeting. We've set several more along the fall, hoping to finish up the work of this group heading into December. Next slide, please. Today, we're going to spend some time on welcome introductions. I'm going to go around and ask all the members to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the work they do. Then we're going to remind everyone the scope of work, the reason we've all convened here. Talk a little about our meeting schedule and our timeline, as well as the topics per meeting that have been outlined, keeping in mind that these are all proposed by me, and this is obviously going to reflect the input of the group so that if you guys say we want to go back to something, if we want to move forward, if we want to spend more time, let me know. And then today we'll dig into some overviews and deep dives, and then we'll talk about next meeting. Next slide, please. All right, so as a reminder, there have been a lot of very large recent planning documents created. We recently adopted our general plan last year. Prior to that, we had adopted the housing affordability housing opportunity master plan. And this work group was created with a very specific directive, which was to evaluate the feasibility of the targeted incentive program for affordable and accessible housing, and then a series of action items. The bolded action item, letter A, is the creation of a definition of affordable and accessible housing, including physical factors such as unit type, size, or physical accessibility design criteria, and/or income factors through tools such as deed restrictions. This is really going to be the topic that we're going to kind of dig in today as our deep dive, but I always want to remind everyone this working as a function of the whole. So I was kind of remind this is that at the end of the day, we essentially have a robust and comprehensive incentive program and understanding of how we can address this prime directive. Next slide. As I said earlier, today is sort of our big first meeting that we're going to dig into things. I'm going to do a very quick overview of some of those big planning efforts, like our general plan, the current housing environment in Howard County, sort of digging a little bit on affordable and accessible housing in the county. Those overviews will not do those topics justice at all, but they're more just to kind of get us all on the same page with some basic information. And then we'll move into our discussion where we're going to try to talk a little bit about how we can better define affordable and accessible housing, talking about income, household size, as well as programs, housing typologies, and physical features that relate to that. Keep in mind as you're listening to the overviews, and then when you go home and you get to fall asleep every night reading through the 2,000 pages worth of planning studies that I've included in your virtual binder, you can reach out to me at any time. You can reach out to anyone at DPC in terms of requests for more information and data for your next meeting, and then we'll try to continue to update that virtual binder and post it. Or if there's something where you're triggered with a question, you say, oh, could we drill down more into that? Please let me know. We want to make sure you guys have as much information as you can to provide a great recommendation. So next slide. And this is our current proposed timeline for the next meeting. If we finish up today and we feel like we've really gotten into a good place, we'll kind of move into talking a little bit about the adequate public facilities ordinance and specifically the affordable housing set aside that exists within that column. So for anyone, a lot of you are intimately familiar with this kind of information, but anyone who is not, will provide that overview to kind of get everyone up to the same speed. And then for discussion, I wanted to put this up here now because I think a lot of you in your work already think about how to increase production of affordable housing. You already think about lessons you've learned throughout your careers, but I wanted you guys to be primed to bring that to Howard County, talk about realistic industry solutions for that set aside column, and also kind of start thinking about establishing the goals and criteria for an incentive program for Howard County. So that will be a little bit of the homework for next meeting that we have, which will be held on October 21st. And clearly I failed to update meeting number 3 correctly, which also says October 21st. So I will follow up and confirm with you. You have all received the invitations, hazards of copy and paste. So I will make sure I get you all the full meeting schedule that we have. Next. All right, digging in, today's deep dive. This is really kind of focusing on all the recent planning studies that have provided guidance and policy direction for meeting the county's housing needs, including our affordable housing needs. 2 major planning documents, as I discussed, is the 2021 Housing Opportunities Master Plan and the 2023 General Plan, HOPA by design. As part of the general plan process, there was a market research and demand forecast that was conducted, and that's really found that there were a lot of land constraints and affordability challenges that could impact the ability to accommodate future residential and commercial growth. and that obviously has a direct adverse impact on both the economic health of the county, but also its residents. So a lot of the information we're going to be digging into today is census data and also studies or reports that were conducted as part of this. And a reminder of the thing we're deep diving into today from your scope of work. Next slide, please. So really briefly, HOCO by Design, which is the recently adopted general plan, which we like to now say is an award-winning plan since we recently received a NACO award for best in class for planning, and we're very proud of that. But we know that setting that policy guidance is really just the first step down a long path of implementing the vision that was trying to be set. So general plans, what they generally provide is policy guidance at a very high level, and they articulate the long-term vision that we have for the county. In our HOCO by Design general plan, we have certain plan goals, such as protecting our natural environment, strengthening our economic opportunities, expanding our transportation options, promoting a diversity of housing choice, and prioritizing community character, as we are a community that is substantially built out. So we have a lot of existing neighborhoods that we have to factor into our development. And then we also want to balance growth and conservation. Next slide. So, as I mentioned a little earlier, we have a limited supply of both land and housing, but we continue to see growing demand. Each general plan, when those processes are undertaken, they're always grappling with something. So, early on in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, Howard County was dealing with expansive growth and how do we manage this expansive growth? And what we're really challenged with here in the 2020s is meeting the needs of a growing and diverse population, because as we all know, what you planned for 50 years ago is for that population at that time, and not necessarily considering, well, what are the current needs of our current population and how can we anticipate the needs of our future population? We have very high demand for commercial, residential, and employment growth. It's a great problem to have. Everyone wants to be here, but it also poses a lot of challenges to our existing population and our future population. We have a very low supply of undeveloped land, so how we grow is going to be a major thing that we grapple with. We don't have enough affordable housing options, particularly to meet the demand. And we're seeing increasing costs of housing and also another dwindling supply. So right now, the projections for how we're meeting demand and supply are not aligned in a way that will be healthy for us moving forward as a community. And then in the background of all this, we do not exist in a vacuum. There are climate change is a reality that we will be facing. So where we have grown in the past may not be appropriate for future growth, and our residents and our businesses will be impacted on the physical level by changes in our climate. And on top of all of this, which is a topic we'll really dig into next meeting, is adequate public facilities. And these are really all the things that go with private development, such as parks, schools, bike lanes, sidewalks, and other community facilities. Going back to what I said earlier about having to balance growth and a lot of these amenities that go with it in a way that is both economically healthy and feasible, but in a way that doesn't prevent us from achieving our overall values and goals that we've articulated in our general plan. So moving on to the next slide. So I think one thing you really have to consider when you're looking at Howard County is that we have had a past practice and policy of protecting both our conserved open space areas for recreation and wildlife protection, but then also doing an agricultural preservation program to conserve the amount of land that we have available in the rural West for agricultural industry. As a result of these policies, as well as a model of generally growing with a fairly low density suburban growth model, is we only have about 2% of land that's undeveloped or unprotected that remains available for greenfield development. And that's going to really limit where and how we grow. We wanted to, at this point in time in the general plan, really refine the character areas that we have. We've essentially created 18 different character areas. This is existing, this was based off of our existing land use and then takes our policies and goals for the future and creates a map of future land uses where if we are able to implement the way that we think we should implement those policy goals, this is potentially the future land use map we will have going forward. And the different character areas, it's really refining those to express what they are currently and what they might become if the policies help push them towards it. What you're really seeing is that we're focusing growth into redevelopment areas. That's going to be on a much smaller scale in some of our established communities, and then a more targeted and higher levels of growth being pushed into a smaller activity centers. We have different flavors of activity centers, a variety of types spread throughout the eastern side of Howard County where those activity centers are located. Next slide, please. And this is, we know that the future land use map can get a little dizzying in the amount of information that's being conveyed. So this is really a simplified version of that. And what it's really showing you is where are the areas that are really existing, established neighborhoods where we don't see a lot of change occurring in those versus where do we see a lot of call for transformation as part of the general plan policies. And you'll see the orange area on the map is the areas to transform. Those are really the activity centers that we're looking at. And then we have areas because, as we say, life does not stand still. So there's always room for enhancing, strengthening, and transforming areas where tweaks to those existing neighborhoods can improve the quality for them. As well as areas that are generally going to just kind of reduce that level of transformation and change, but we're still going to continue to enhance them. Next slide, please. So here's some data and findings that really, were articulated very well in the Housing Opportunities Master Plan. The main takeaways for this is that there is a major mismatch in employment and housing in the county. We have a lot of employees who work in the county, but they either cannot afford to live here or they choose not to live here. And this imbalance is quite out of step with some of our neighbors, which could indicate that this is something unique that's happening in Howard County, not necessarily a natural function of how people might choose to locate if there weren't other factors that were kind of pushing them one way or the other. And that our newest housing supply tends to be larger and more expensive. So it might not be meeting a need that we have. And that, quite frankly, we are not producing enough housing to meet the demand that we have. And that contributes to artificially inflating our housing prices. So we have a lot of different factors that are affecting our housing market. We're grappling with the reality of that. Next slide, please. And that demand and supply balance, it's not just in our purchased homes, we're also seeing it in rentership, where we're seeing more and more rentals happening for all age groups. Some of that is changing preferences, but it's more a factor of the rising costs and the fact that there is a large barrier to home ownership as well. You'll notice if you look at the overall scope, one of the last items we'll be looking at is how do we promote home ownership opportunities as well. So keep that in back in mind as we're working through these meetings, topics, and discussions. So in general, what we need is a variety of residential options for our existing and our future residents, thinking about homeownership, thinking about rental. Essentially, the goal should be, if you want to live in Howard County, you can find something that meets your needs, both of the physical needs, but then also at the price that you can afford. So, next slide, please. So this goes into a little bit what we talked about in terms of what percent of people can afford to live here and what do they need to make to be able to live here. Fairly low numbers in terms of what people make and then what they would have to make to be able to live here. I think actually in the next slide, we go into it, is that Howard County is really wealthy comparatively to the region, the state, to the United States. We have some very high incomes, but that is not everyone. And so there's a lot of people getting left behind. Our median income is $141,000 in 2023. You can see just how much significantly higher that is. And then a finer grade, you can go to the next slide. You can see in the upper right column some of the brackets that we pulled, showing that the kind of different incomes that people are making in Howard County. Our largest portion is really about $100,000 to $150,000. And then we have, not our largest. Our largest portion is that contingent of 32% of people who make more than $200,000. And then the remainder, it's really spread out over much lower amounts. And then I'm actually going to hand over to Kelly to talk a little bit about the blue chart.
Great, thanks, Jim. So this is a chart that we use in the housing department for our housing program. So this is actually for our settlement down payment loan program. And what the very first column, the home starter loan, those are the HUD Baltimore area median income limits per household size. So a household of size of 4 up to $97,750 would be eligible for funding that we receive as a department from the federal government, from the Department of HUD. The next 3 categories are ways we can help residents with homeownership with Howard County funding. So this is transfer tax funding that comes into the department through Community Renewal Fund. So we look at the 80% of Howard County area median income is the homesteader loan. So you can see it goes from 97 to 103. This means those families earning up to $103,639, if they're a family of 4, can qualify for a settlement down payment loan of $25,000 to purchase a home. The first column is $40,000 of assistance. So what you see is the higher the incomes go, the less help they can get. But at the same time, when you do have the lower incomes, we do have the ability to provide a lot more assistance. But as the other chart shows, to get people earning that amount of money to be able to qualify, well, it'll show it another one, I think, the home prices are not there. We don't, if you make $97,000 a year, you can afford, best case, $300,000 home, best case. By the time you add in taxes, insurance, HOA fees, condo fees, you're maybe looking $250,000. We just don't have any homes at $250,000 here in the county. When you get to the homesteader loan and you can earn up to $103,000, we do have our moderate income housing units that will qualify for that. So our moderate income housing unit program, our inclusionary zoning, our prices are in the high 2s, low to mid 3s. We can get a family earning up about $100,000 a year into a moderate income housing unit. The home starter loan, we can get them into some of the moderate income housing units, but they might have to have 0 debt or 3 or 4 kids. So it's tough, But the homesteader loan is the specific category designed to serve the moderate income housing unit program. But at the same time, the Dream Maker loan is to help people who want to purchase a home And they have a little bit more income, but we don't want to have a barrier of providing down, that they can't come up with a down payment. So that third column, Dreammaker, is 100% of Howard County median income. And when you get to that 130,000, maybe they can buy a $400,000 home. Again, tough here in Howard County, but with that, there are some people who can use that, and they still need assistance with down payment and closing costs to help them remove that barrier. And that loan gives you $15,000. So we are trying to address what we consider workforce with the Homesteader and the Dreammaker. The Revitalization and Workforce Initiative, this one is definitely targeted at workforce. If you earn up to 110% of Howard County median income, you can get a loan to pay your transfer and recordation tax. And again, that's another way of reducing that barrier of cash to buy a home. So that 110%, when you're getting up to that 142, you're going to find a little bit more inventory. But again, our inventory overall has been very low. But these are the programs, these are the income limits we're using to try to address our very low income families, and then our moderate, and then our workforce. Anybody have any questions on that just before we move on to the next
Kelly.
one? Go ahead, Paul.
In columns 2, 3, and 4,
Mhm.
who sets the percentage of the county median?
We do, the Department of Housing. So we use the American Community Survey 5-year estimate for Howard County.
So that's 80% of that number.
Correct.
So you could do, are you telling me you could do 90%?
Not the way the code is currently written, but yes, if there was a change to do 90%, yes, the county would have that option.
And I'm assuming then in the first column, that's a HUD number. You can't change that. No one can change that.
We can't change the HUD numbers, but we could decide as a county to give a loan of 90%
Okay.
if we chose to. Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
Mhm.
I appreciate you digging in on the deep dive.
Well, one last thing.
Sure.
So your 80, 100, and 110% are set by code, or do they float by the market?
They're set by code.
So no matter what the market is doing, it's 80, 100, or 110.
Correct.
So do you think floating by the market would be helpful?
It could be.
Okay.
We shall revisit that in our discussion.
Yeah, so that, looking at the way county is doing things, does that need to change in order to accomplish the goals of creating more affordable housing? Yes.
Because those are all really nice columns, but I'll bet you that there aren't 50 units a year that qualify. Not including MIHUs.
I would say you're probably right. But just because of lack of inventory.
Right.
Mhm.
I'm moving on with them.
So go.
So we talked a little bit leading into this about our incomes that we have for our households, as well as some of the existing housing programs we have trying to address affordable housing. Also wanted to talk about how our demographics have changed. We noticed in our general plan market assessment that there was a housing preferences that are shifting in favor of smaller homes. We have a growing population, sort of our largest cohorts are kind of young single professionals and empty nesters, and that those cohorts don't really necessarily align with the type of housing supply that we have. So there was definitely a demand that we saw for working professionals who want to live on their own and who don't want to have to find roommates so that they can rent out other areas. As I said, the empty nesters, as well as seniors who are looking for age-friendly options. And that without an adequate supply of these homes, they might not be able to locate in Howard County, or they stay in the home that might not be appropriate for them, because most people, especially as they age, they have built their community, they've built their support and social network, and they're not interested in leaving that. And so a lot of times when they do leave it, it's more of them being pushed out and choosing to leave it. So that's one of the issues that particularly affect our senior population. But I did want to note that I asked Mr. Bronow if he could pull our household size that we're seeing in Howard County. And you'll notice that in 1980, we had about a 2.94 average household size. size, and then that dropped significantly in 1990 and has been steadily increasing over time. So we do see a trend of increasing household size. Next slide, please. Oh,
Let's step on.
yeah. Thank you. And this is a little bit more of a kind of fine grained of the total populations, our occupied houses, and our average household size. You'll see the blue is the highlighted Howard County. Interesting that we are growing in household size, whereas some of our surrounding counties are actually decreasing. The why behind this is kind of subject to debate. There's a few potential sources for this. As we all know, Howard County has a reputation as a very desirable school district, so that contributes to household size. But I know that Jeff, do jump in if I'm getting this wrong, but I do think the last time we did kind of an overview of the census demographic, we showed that an increasing multi-generational households as well is a factor that we have. So that could be grandparents living with a primary family. It could be adult children living with their parents. But we do want to keep this in mind that while there is a need for a diversity of housing types, particularly to serve smaller households, we do have this kind of ticking up increase. So next slide, please. So this is kind of the overview, and after this, I'll stop chatting at you and we can actually dig into our discussion. And I just really want to say, overall, what we know is there is a very large pent-up demand for housing in Howard County, and that is particularly affecting workforce housing, which are those who they make good money. They just don't make good enough money to live here. And we have our current zoning regulations that limit opportunities for missing middle housing types and accessory dwelling units. Those are certain housing types that we don't really allow that might serve the workforce housing. They might serve households that are both the empty nesters, the young professionals, as well as kind of the smaller families with growing household size. So that's really trying to focus on the diversity of housing types. Our affordable options in particular are limited for seniors, for disabled residents. So that's really going to go back around when we talk about accessible housing, as well as our special needs populations. Our workforce housing, our essential workers, they encounter major challenges in attaining housing. And our residential development in the rural West is, as well as some of our PSA, which is the public service area on the eastern side, follow low density lot development patterns. They're generally unaffordable to low, moderate, and workforce income households. And we don't really have a lot of options for growing out to the west. There are major limitations set both by local policy, but also state and federal policies that limit well and septic, as well as our agricultural preserved land policies in the past, where those are now preserved into the future. So that creates major barriers to looking west, and we kind of have to really grapple with what can we do with our planned service area. So those are some of the major takeaways that we're wrestling with as we delve into our discussion items to how can we update Howard County's rules, regulations, and codes to encourage the kind of housing we need at the prices we need for that. So if we can go to the next slide, I'm going to pause here and realize that I got so excited prepping for this meeting, but I completely failed to invite everyone to go around and introduce themselves. So we're going to pause and go back to do that. I'm Jessica Bella. I'm Deputy Director here, one of the Deputy Directors here at Howard County's Department of Planning and Zoning. I'm going to be one of the main staff facilitators for this working group. So I think I'll do a round robin around the room and then invite everyone who's online, since Lisa will be the one who can see who they are. So we'll start in the room with Kelly, who you've already heard from once.
I'm Kelly Simon. I'm the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development for Howard County.
Good afternoon, I'm Tom Evans, focusing on the disability portion of the need, and retired from Northrop Grumman, state of Maryland. having fun in the garden and working on this.
I'm Paul Ravel. I'm a small residential land developer here in the county. And I've been active with the Affordable Coalition for, I don't know, I say 10 years or so. And I ask a lot of questions.
Which we enjoy.
That's good.
Mary Kendall, another deputy director with the Department of Planning and Zoning.
Jeff Delmonico, community planner, here to support Jessica.
Lisa Kenny, planning tech support, here to support Jessica, and you'll probably see lots of emails from me and links. If you want to go online, how about Tanika? Tanika, can you hear us?
Hello. Yeah. Can you guys hear me? I had to unmute myself. I'm sorry.
You're good. You're good. Go
So hi,
ahead.
everybody. Yeah, so I'm Tanika Richardson. I am a long-term Howard County resident. I volunteer a lot around housing policy issues, but in my day job, I'm a housing policy analyst for the Maryland Center on Economic Policy.
Thank you. Ned?
Hi, I'm Ned Howe. I'm Vice President of Development, Structuring and Sourcing, or Sourcing and Structuring, something like that. With Enterprise Community Development, as I said. Our main company is headquartered in Columbia and Howard County, and we do a lot of work in Howard County, and I do try to answer a lot of Paul Ravel's questions.
He's been a victim.
Catherine Valentine? Catherine?
Let's give Catherine an opportunity to unmute herself.
Yeah, Catherine, you can unmute yourself. I can't do it from here. There she goes. Oh, there she was. Grace?
Yes, hi. This is Grace Morris. I'm Executive Director of Heritage Housing Partners. We own and manage affordable housing in Howard County, and we manage affordable housing for other owners, both inside Howard County and in surrounding communities.
Thank you. Catherine, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Oh, you can hear me now. You can hear me
Yes.
now?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my God, I will say this has not been the best logistic meeting I've been into. My name is Catherine Valentine. I'm a longtime resident of Howard County. Probably for over 30 years, seen a lot of development in the area, particular mine. I bring a lot of wealth of accounting and finance to this group, and I look forward to hearing the different challenges that come up regarding affordable housing in Howard County.
Thank you. Jacqueline?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
I can. Go right ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. My name is Jacqueline West Spencer. I am a Howard County resident, also a real estate development and affordable housing development professional. So housing policy is the work that I've been doing for my entire career. I'm also the chair of the Howard County Housing Commission. So it's a pleasure to be with you all today. So thank you.
Oh, that's everyone.
Perfect. Thank you all for joining us. I know how busy all of your schedules are and that it's very difficult to find time for us to come together. So very much appreciate you guys being able to make it today. So I'm gonna kind of stop talking for a bit. And what we put on the screen is some prompting questions, just to get the ball rolling. I know sometimes it's easier to respond to a prompt than it is to kind of just say, and discuss. but obviously you are not limited to these questions. We really want to kind of bring all of your expertise into a similar room and have you actually discuss it. Many of you are selected because you understand the industry or you understand the dynamics, and you can bring that expertise to the policies and the directives to come up with realistic solutions that the county could approach to addressing all the issues that we just went over in our presentation. So I'm going to start off with our first question and just ask you guys, what are other barriers than some of that we already talked about to affordable housing production? And as a side note, are you aware of other jurisdictions, localities, and how they've addressed those barriers? So if anyone has any thoughts about other barriers, it's the perfect time.
Time is a barrier. So we've got a very long process in the county, not pointing fingers at anybody, but it's gotten longer and longer and longer over the years. My first subdivision I did, it took me 9 months to get through the process. That's from sketch plan to plat recording. Now, even if I didn't have any AMFO problems, I count on 5 years. That's far too long to produce any kind of housing. And so it manages to be a barrier all by itself. So if you're not from this area and you're not accustomed to a 5-year wait, you get shocked and you leave. So it doesn't invite people to come in here and do any kind of development work. And then they get hit with the land is so expensive. Oh my God, I can't, that's too risky. So the time is a problem for anybody doing this kind of work, but particularly difficult for someone who's trying to do affordable housing, because the ground isn't going to sit still. It's going to get sold to somebody. It's going to be something else. And maybe we can scooch in a little bit of affordable housing as part of the deal, but it's not the emphasis. So I'm bringing up time as a problem because it just keeps getting longer and longer and longer. Oftentimes for really good, valid, legitimate reasons. We've added design advisory panel, we've added ECP to the process. All of that's really good in producing a better product, but it's taking too long.
So Paul, pulling on that, if you were in another jurisdiction, Anne Arundel, Carroll, Baltimore, are they similar? Are they more, less? Are other developers, others you said they might leave here, would they go to Baltimore, Anne Arundel?
Everybody's got their own form of growth control. Ours is a little bit more advanced in the nearby jurisdictions. And I think because of that, we've just added so many pieces to it that it's a little clumsy now. But everyone faces that someplace. But in the other places, there is more developable land here. So we're over controlling what's the last little 2% that's out there. I don't know what I would do if I were king of Howard County, how I would fix it, but I'm telling you, it's a problem.
I'm just wondering if, in other counties, is it a 5-year from sketch plan to?
No.
Okay,
Honestly.
so somebody's doing it in less time.
Yeah. Now, and this is without AMFO, is it?
Right, sure. Well, that's a whole other animal.
That can add up a whole bunch of time. And that effectively shuts the door.
Right.
You're not seeing a lot of projects coming through and sitting in who've been waiting 4 or 5 years to get through. You see a few, but that's the rarity.
Right.
Yeah, other places are more inviting to do work in than here.
So that's just something we as a group should be maybe looking at other
Yeah.
jurisdictions to see what they're doing.
We're still attractive. People want to move here, so.
Yeah.
And this applies to all projects or single-family dwellings versus apartment compounds, or?
I would say almost any of them. Some have bigger problems. I mean, downtown Columbia is a thicket to get through. Redeveloping a village center is a worse thicket to get through. But yeah, I would say any form of housing in the county now has at least a 5-year process to get through. It need not be that.
I believe, there she goes.
Yeah, I did. I just wanted a point of clarity. Are you saying, and I think I heard it, you're saying no matter what type of development, whether it's affordable housing or non-affordable housing, it's still that 5-year period to get any project through. That's what you're
Yes,
saying?
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Would it be beneficial to the group if for the next meeting, we provide you kind of averages, length of time that different projects have taken to get through and maybe ask around and see if some of the jurisdictions?
I'd rather talk about how to fix the, the iterations. I mean, we've got final plans going through 6 and 7, 8 and 9 iterations. That shouldn't be. We have the standard now that sketch plans go through 3 iterations, PCPs through 3 iterations, final plans at least 3. Each iteration is a quarter of a year.
And do you know the reasons behind that or how to fix that?
No, I don't know the reasons behind them. I have ideas how I would fix them. I think what's happened is that the ground we're working with now is more difficult. It is steeper, it is wetter. It is the last little bit left on the corner of, Elm Street and 9. And there's a reason why it's left. So it is harder to do. But I think what we ought to do is recognize that it is harder to do, but that's what's going to get developed. Let's figure out how to do it rather than keep saying, no, you did it wrong. No, you did it wrong. Change this. We've got to fix that. And we don't have that mentality right now. We have people following the rules. No one's doing anything wrong. We just have too many rules slowing us down too much.
And I think as we talk about potential for redevelopment, is the process going to be as cumbersome for redevelopment?
In some ways, because you're working up against a neighbor's fence,
Right.
several neighbors' fences. So you've got to be even more careful.
Right.
So the tendency will be to make 5 years 6. And stay away from that.
So,
I would,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Ned.
yeah, I was just gonna, Paul's is kind of the reaction or the circumstance that comes out of the prevailing attitude. And the prevailing attitude is not a Maryland thing. Not just a Howard County thing. It's kind of a Maryland thing, and you're starting to see some pushback on it. It's the whole no growth. That's really what this is all driving. So whatever it is to make it harder, to get more community involvement, to get more hearings, to figure out APFO, everything is designed to slow down growth and put all the problems and ills of the jurisdiction on the backs of the development community because they're the problem. And that's, in a nutshell, what needs to be adjusted. Because all this is a result of that, and all these continual regulatory items and additional meetings and hearings and everyone having standing and everyone needing to voice an opinion on everything is all about, let's just slow down growth because it's more politically acceptable to think that way. And affordable housing gets caught up in all that mess as well. You follow Tom Cole, who'll be the first one thing that says housing is infrastructure. It is part of an element of everything in every community. And, it's kind of like the tide rises for all, the tide falls for all. If housing is slowed down in all affordability regimes, it's a problem. And that's really what we're facing right now is a crisis because there's not enough housing because the production has been slowed down immensely.
So just to add to that, this is Jackie. To what Ned is saying, other jurisdictions are also having long periods of time in order to have projects approved. Other jurisdictions are changing their land use zoning requirements. They're bringing in new processes without staff fully understanding how to implement those policies, whether it's Prince George's County, whether it's the District of Columbia. Just to be able to get a project approved throughout the state and in Washington, D.C. can be anywhere from 3 to 5 to 6 to 7 years for all of the reasons that Ned has identified. And I think the The challenge is when you lack predictability, when you lack continuity of resources and a clear thought process on what is important and making sure that the resources are there, it adds time to this process, and it becomes a true barrier for us to be able to build the necessary housing and the variety of housing that is needed within Howard County and throughout the state. And I think that is, in the land use process, the lack of predictability in terms of financial resources that can be remain and be committed at the state and the local levels, because that drives production, that drives being able to meet a need, whether it's affordable or mixed income products that we're trying to address within the marketplace. And I think another barrier to all of this is, particularly within Howard County and other high cost communities, where is there any low cost land, right? So Baltimore City has a great inventory of land, but they have a different set of issues and so forth, but other communities may not have county-owned land or municipality-owned land. In Prince George's County, right? There are over 20 plus jurisdictions and municipalities, but there's still publicly owned land that can help keep the cost down, that would allow the production of affordable housing if it did not have the other barriers that Ned and I mentioned. So that's something to think about. It's predictability and accountability of resources to really create a production that is needed to address the affordable housing needs within, throughout the state.
This is Grace. I was going to hop in there too. I think Ned started to speak with this, and that's the no growth, but it's also just the whole NIMBY. I'm here now, so close the door behind me, and especially if it's affordable housing. So we definitely have a public perception problem as well.
So it sounds like a lot of this is based on no growth or anti-growth. Does Howard County have any way they can predict growth? Do they have a demand curve plotted out 4 or 5 years for potential housing needs for new employees and whatnot?
I think we have I'll defer to Mary and Jeff Brunner on this one. I think we have a pretty good understanding of where demand is at and the number of demand we have. And our general plan outlines where we want to target growth and by about how much we want to kind of accommodate growth in those specific transformation areas that we showed in the map earlier. But as we know, there's so many different factors in actually achieving that growth, both in the regulatory changes that we can make, but then also what the landowner wants to do, having the financial industry able to fund that kind of growth. So we can get you the more specifics on the actual demand. A lot of it's in the appendix items.
Okay.
Various planning documents. But I want to make sure I'm fully understanding your specific request.
Well, the no growth is predicated on we've got enough. But if the local companies and industries are growing, building up their workforces, and there's a demand, what is that demand? Is it straight line, or is it?
Oh, so essentially, what is the growth line for employment continuing to grow and
yeah.
housing continuing?
Like Fort Meade had 75,000 cars going through their gates every day, like 4 or 5 years ago. So, the growth there has been phenomenal. And, maybe it's not growth anymore. Maybe it's necessity.
I think the third or fourth slide, has the numbers. It's not necessarily charted out. You can look into the information that fed into those overall numbers.
Yeah. So basically right there. Yeah. So did you want me to jump in and talk about
there or one more?
The one that had, I think it's after this. Go one more.
Slide 9.
There it is. Yeah. So basically, when we started our planning process for HOCO by Design, the general plan, so the general plan, as just mentioned, sets the vision for growth, development, and land preservation over the next 20 years. So whenever you start a planning process, you have to think about, well, what do we anticipate our growth to be over the next 20 years? Well, what's the demand? And what this slide is pointing out is, well, we have a really high demand for both employment growth and then therefore residential growth. So what RCLCO did, that was the economist group that we retained to assist us with doing the market analysis for HOCO by Design. So they predicted there's a demand for about 59,000 new jobs in the county over a 20-year period. And then based on that job growth, they said, well, you're going to need about 31,000 new homes based on the future job growth that you anticipate. Because the idea is that you want to, and it's not that people would necessarily be required to live in the county in which they work, but you want them to have the opportunity to do that, because there's a lot of other things that will benefit from that, right? We'll have reduced vehicles driving in and out of the county, right? We've got to deal with climate change. So the number of vehicles we can reduce on the road, the more we can reduce traffic, the better it is for the environment and quality of life as well. So that's what that demand was based on. So yes, we do look at demand. And then what Jeff Bronow looks at is more specific projection based on the site plans that come in over the course of daily, weekly, monthly, however often they come in. And he can make certain development unit projections based on those actual site plans.
And I do, for next week, when we get into the overview of adequate public facilities, we'll do that presentation and kind of looking at growth in the historical growth, and then kind of what we're estimating based on what we're seeing. Do you want to go back to the discussion slide? Because I know we've kind of had an opportunity for people raising, this is the environment we're in, this is some concern we have.
This is Catherine, and I was looking at the previous slide that was up when that, what is it called, HOCO by Design was created. I will be interested to know, with the way you outlined, you tied job growth to housing growth, and I get the correlation. I guess my question is, when COVID hit and kind of changed the dynamic of the workforce as a whole, now a lot of the demand for the new workforce is that they're allowed to work from home a certain amount of days. So how does that come into play and address those numbers? And has anyone looked at that effect? Because I get the whole work which you live and how it affects the environment, but how does now the workforce now, even the federal government has gone to a hybrid situation. So how does that take into effect some of those numbers that are related to jobs and housing? Because again, I'm still stuck on, you only have so much you can work with no matter where the person lives, let alone the affordability of Howard County.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question, Catherine. So I do know that that's some data that's still being analyzed by a lot of our regional planning commissions, I believe. And I know Jeff Bronow, I think, is Jeff online? Okay, we keep saying his name, Jeff. Okay, great. But so that's still something that's being looked at. But I know what has been occurring is that there are more places of employment. So for example, the federal government, they initially said, okay, fine, everyone can work from home. And then they started to change their policy, and they started to require, I think, some departments to start to have to come back into the office on a kind of on a 2 or 3 times a week, right?
Yeah, it's very hybrid. It's very hybrid.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
hybrid.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think it kind of depends on the type of employment. So for example, in Howard County, we have a lot of tech-based industry, cybersecurity, skiff-based employers, because a lot of our population, a lot of our employers are sort of feeding off of the Fort Meade growth that had occurred within the past so many years. So there are some employers that require their staff to be in the office every single day. Some employers allow that hybrid situation, and some are allowing full-time remote work. But I think all of that continues to shift and change and evolve. But specifically the data piece, like I said, I think our regional planning agencies are still looking at that, and that future evolves. Jeff, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Brown. I'm the chief of the research division for Howard County DPZ. So yeah, everything you mentioned, Mary, is right on. The BMC, Baltimore Metropolitan Council, has contracted to do a survey of the impacts of work from home and telework. And I believe they're looking at trying to have that wrapped up at the end of, um, part of it at the end of this year, but it might be early spring of next year. So they are looking at that impact. I think in large part, all of this data is sort of around the edges. It doesn't matter because we all know that there's a need for affordable housing, and the need for affordable housing continues to increase in Howard County and in Maryland and the US. So as long as that need and that demand is there, the purpose of this group is to provide solutions for that. I think that the demand is such that it's higher than what is being met now. So anything that can be done to increase the amount of housing and affordable housing is a plus for sure.
Yes, can I add, switching a topic for a second, if that's okay? On question 3 on the housing types being built, one of the unmet needs in housing demand, particularly for affordable, is among seniors. Right now, the way we meet the demand for senior housing is largely through conditional use. And so there you have to convince the hearing examiner that this is a compatible use in their standards and all sorts of things like that. But a little bit back to my time argument, that you have to go through that hearing examiner process, and then you have to go through the 5-year process. And so that becomes a higher barrier. So what the question's being asked, what could we do to help meet a particular group's housing needs? Maybe we simplify the senior housing development process. I'm not saying get rid of conditional use altogether, but maybe create a different approach for senior housing. It doesn't threaten schools. It has off-peak traffic. It has a number of things that make it more neighborhood friendly. Yes, people are concerned about what happens across the fence from their property. So I'm not saying to ignore all of that, but I think we can deal with it in a way that is not like having a landscape distance built next to you.
Paul, did you say that for the affordable senior housing, right? So that's the ARAH
Yes.
developments. So they all have to go through conditional use or just in certain zoning districts?
Well, you can go through PSC, which is a zoning board case.
Yeah.
Not recommended. Or you can do POR if you can find PORs on the ground. You can.
Okay.
Or you can do conditional use in almost all residential zones.
But it's all through a conditional use
All
process?
through conditional use.
Okay.
It's not the hardest thing in the world if you have a reasonable proposition and you work closely with the neighbors. But it's a year.
Mhm.
Then you do 5 more years. And I don't think that's a way to improve housing affordability for seniors.
Mhm.
Well, I'll say too, there has been some discussion about if there are more options for older adults to move into something that's smaller and more affordable and accessible for them, that opens up some of their large single-family homes or their townhomes for the families that want to move in. So again, it's similar to what we experience in the homeless services work that is now part of the Department of Housing, is that you have to have flow through the system. And so when people get to the point where they don't need their 4-bedroom colonial anymore, but they, again, want to stay in their community, if there is an option for them, then that 4-bedroom colonial becomes available for the family who has school children or multi-generational that wants to live with the parents or the older adult children. So again, we don't have a lot of flow because we don't have the options that we need.
And because we don't have flow, then the newest age-restricted units that are coming out on the marketplace are now selling for over $800,000. And 5 years ago, that was $400,000. So we have less supply, so prices are responding. And I'm recommending that we change the supply end of that equation. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not a planner, but it seems to be obvious that that's an area where we could do something pretty quickly.
Right. And the same thing applies to that in terms of the moderate income housing unit requirement in age restricted housing. Developers can buy out of that. And then that, to me, creates more restraint on affordable housing because they don't have to provide, the developer doesn't have to provide affordable units. And as you said, a few years ago, if they were selling at 400, I don't need to have moderate income housing units in those communities as the department. We don't need them because they're already affordable. But now that they're 800, they're not affordable, and therefore there's no affordability requirement there. So we're building age restricted, but none of the units are affordable. I just want to switch in terms of affordable housing as well, because I pulled up the rental housing survey, which all of you, I hope, received in the folder that I'm sure no one read because it's very long. But in terms of homeownership units, we're also seeing a shortage of rental units, even though a lot of our development has been rental over the last few years. But according to the rental housing survey, there are about 6,000 unserved households looking for rental. And these are people who are already here. These are not new people moving into the county. These are people doubled up, tripled up, so there's already a shortage of affordable rental units for people earning less than $60,000 per year. And these people already live here. So we're having, even though there's a lot of development has been rental, we're still seeing a shortage in supply.
Right.
For rental housing units as well.
Just that was 6,000.
6,000, 6113, but 6,000 is good, yeah. So, some people might say they don't want more rental housing, they'd rather have home ownership, but we have people living here now who don't have any housing options.
I do want to,
Yeah, I would just like this, Tanika. I just like to just piggyback about that. I would just, because I know we had some developers on the call. I'm just curious, because I am a renter too, and the stuff that is being built is at 80% AMI. I know we already looked at the numbers. 80% AMI for a lot of folks is still not affordable. And then if you guys even want to focus on home ownership, let's talk about the fact that for Howard County, the homes that are being built for home ownership are not starter homes. Most people who are buying their first time home, we cannot afford a $500,000 to $700,000 home for a townhouse. That is not affordable, right? So even the things that are being built for home ownership is not affordable. You guys are not building first time homes. And the stuff that's quote unquote supposed to be affordable for renters is not affordable because everything is 80% AMI.
Right.
I wanted to, and that's an excellent point. I do want to say that, but I wanted to go back and focus on the numbers that you mentioned. I believe I heard it was 6,000 people that are currently cannot move in Howard County. Is that what you're saying? I just want a point of clarity on what that number represents.
So the survey says there are approximately 6,000 people earning less than $60,000 per year who cannot find affordable housing here in the county, and they're already living here. So they're paying 40, 50, 60% of their income for housing because they cannot find a unit that they can afford.
And they're already here in affordable housing unit now, or they're here at market rent?
They're here at market rent. They're here at market.
Yeah.
Some people 40 and 50% of their income for rental housing.
And because they're here because they're paying market rent and they
Right.
decided to pay. I just want to understand what the number is coming from. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is Jackie. If I can just start to answer Tanika's question as relates to the lack of affordable number of units that are being produced, and in Tanika, when you're building affordable housing, that is really contingent upon state and local resources. So when there's, going back to my original comment, when there's a lack of predictability of resources at the state, and there's such a great need across the state and limited resources, that is going to limit the opportunity for the development of affordable housing. And then how does that translate to resources that are being made available at the local level will also limit that. I'll give you an example. In DC, and this is before, they're having financial issues and so forth, but prior to last year, they were making about $200 million available for the development of affordable housing for the district. Of course, it's different because they don't have the same level of financial resources that we have in the state, but they've been adding more and more resources so that there could be an increase in the number of affordable housing units that's dedicated. And that has been, prior to their financial crisis, has been a dedicated resource that folks have relied on. In the state, it's varied, over the years, whether it's $35 million for the entire state of Maryland, which is over 5 million people in population that are sharing this pot of money, in addition to another resource, which is called low-income housing tax credits. When you have, over 50 projects throughout the state that are applying for those limited resources each year, that is the challenge of any locality, and particularly in Howard County, of being able to meet that need. What localities have also tried to do, similar to DC, is come up with housing trust fund dollars that are predictable, that they can, leverage state resources and even some federal resources. But when you don't have any predictability and when those resources vary from year to year, and it's, there's a lack of, I don't want to say lack of transparency, but you just don't know how much money is going to be made available. That is what, impedes us being able to meet the affordable rental housing need, and as well as the any type of affordable home ownership opportunities. It's just that lack of consistency and continuity and of what the financial resources are going to be. And then add interest rates to that in the private market, and it throws everything out of whack.
Well said, Jackie. So I think Ned can even speak to the fact that Enterprise each year applies for low-income housing tax credits, and 50-50 shot that their projects get funded. So that, is a definite challenge that we face here in our very affluent community.
Yep. And 50-50 is good now. It used to be worse, but some of the applications have gone down because the interest rate problems and the construction cost problems. So people can't make ends meet. And I will applaud that Howard County, when we first started doing work in Howard County, did not really have much in the way of subordinate debt options or whatever. The only thing Howard County's ever really worked with up until recently was the ability to get at least some tax abatement for affordable deals. But that stopped being relevant for tax credit applications a long time ago. I mean, it's real financial resources in the ways of subordinate debt that really are making Howard County more competitive for those other federal resources. So kudos to Howard County starting to invest in their affordable housing products, and keep it up, because we need a whole lot more.
So I'm loath to insert myself in discussion that's actively occurring. I do want to pull us back to some of the questions there. Also keep in mind, as we're discussing our challenges, I do encourage you guys to talk about any solutions that you've seen that have been successful elsewhere, because I think that is sort of the cusp of where Howard County is at, is trying to figure out what can we do, what can we implement, what can we change that can move the needle from where we are right now. So I think we talked a little about the barriers, we talked some about the housing types. I think we touched on, but I don't know if we've had a specific dive at our affordable housing income brackets, and if those support the different income levels of our workforce. If you guys are comfortable moving back to that.
Nearly half of the workforce is in the service and leisure and hospitality jobs, and they cannot afford to live here. I mean, just drive someplace else, live there, come here. So that's hospital, that's hotels, that's restaurants. So those are, like I said, nearly half the workforce of the people working in the county. I'm not talking about the owners of businesses. That's a different set of employment numbers. But So they cannot. So we would have to move our affordability number way down to a very difficult number to make a deal pencil. But the answer is.
I'll put Chester in there. Chester.
I think even teachers fall into that category.
By themselves, yes.
So Paul, are you saying then that 80%, so a lot of the income requirements for our MIHU program, you have to be a max of 80%. So we're setting it too high in some regards. So in some cases, we're setting it too high. In some cases, we're not giving a workforce.
Here at
Yeah.
60%. Because 60% of $130,000 is more than you're making as a bartender in a hotel. It's more than you're making if you're working in a food program at the hospital. It's just more. And then that's not where we're aiming. Our moderate income housing program is at 60 and 80%. And it's missing most of the folks. I don't know that we can do anything about that, but you asked the question, so.
Well, I think, Paul, you and I have, you were instrumental in helping us develop the low-income housing unit category of the MIHU program and the disability income housing unit program. And it's how do we incentivize developers to use those options to really get the ability to offer, instead of providing 15% of the units as moderate income housing units, maybe 7% of the units as LIHU, low income housing units, or 5% of the units as disability income housing units. So what incentives could the county possibly provide to encourage developers to provide units at a lesser rent or lesser price?
I think that's a great set of solutions. I agree. Providing incentives, because right now the LIHU and the DIHU program are aimed at neutrality.
Correct.
So that you can either do 10% MIHU or you can do, making this up, 5% LIHU. And when you do the math, it's about the same.
Correct.
So what Kelly's suggesting, putting words in her mouth, but would be to reduce the LIHU from 5 to.
Or maybe you're going to do LIHUs, maybe there's a reduction in permitting fees, maybe there's a reduction in.
Maybe there's no ACFO.
Potentially, something of that nature to incentivize developers to help us address the need for more lower income units.
Right now, it's a difficult sale to make to an apartment developer. They're doing 300 units. They know they got to do 30 MIHU. All right, I'm done. Then you got to get in there and have them understand how that whole thing would work out. And to them, it just affects their cap value effectively. So we've got to make it worth their while to consider that. Right now they're just not.
And I think an education thing. So as we go through this group, when this group comes up with findings, one of the things I'd love to see is an education campaign for developers. What are some things that we're doing out of this to create housing affordability? What are we as a county doing to increase affordability? So, maybe it's an education, we do a road show. People tell me all the time that the department should go and do a road show of the moderate income housing unit program. So maybe it's a road show to developers about what this group comes up with.
I think it's nice that you're willing to do more, but I think we need to help more.
Agreed. I'm just saying that's a suggestion of how things have come up. But once this group is done, I'd love to see, the county educate the developers here as to what options are available.
So I'm hearing from this is that we need to incentivize how people use our different categories that we have for our income brackets.
And improve the categories.
Do you have any specific feedback for those categories themselves and sort of where to cap the numbers or where to have like a stratification that's a little bit more refined or targeted?
Well, a couple of things. One, in HOCO by Design, we sort of established a community goal that 20% of new units would be MIHU. So somehow we got to work that out. And then within that 20%, I would begin structuring the kinds of incentives that Kelly's talking about. So it's going to be 20% of that 300 new units. But here are things that we can do to maintain your cap value, but do a lot for the community. Because that 20% is how we're going to get to 300 affordable units a year. We're not going to get there at 10%.
Mhm.
It's just not going to happen. Because we're not producing that much volume right yet. So is that part of the answer?
I'm lobbing up questions. Not
Keep lobbing.
I think one of the things too we talked about was just understanding better the demand and the income levels of our workforce here in the county so that we can figure out ways to serve that population better. In other words, the bartender, the employee at the grocery store, the childcare worker. How do we understand better what the demand is and what those income levels are, and how do we address rental or homeownership units? Are we offering a wide enough menu to address the different income categories of the workforce?
One of the objections I hear about affordable housing, it's not a major one, but it's a theme. And that is that, well, it needs to be located where public transportation is available. Well, we have public transportation in Howard County, but it is, have you ever tried it?
I have, as a matter of fact.
Okay, then you know that you need to plan for your whole day.
Yes.
To be on the bus to get there and back. So I don't know that we should be prioritizing putting affordable housing near a transportation system that barely operates.
I will say it is a misconception that lower income families do not have a car.
Right.
That is a misconception. It is rare in the moderate income housing unit program where the family does not have a car. It's rare.
I was getting ready to talk on that piece about transportation because and thank you for saying that, because in Howard County in the transportation, the reason why is that out of the Howard County Department of Transportation, it was found that 97% of Howard Countyans have access to a car. So why would the county spend that type of money on transportation and utilization? And I've seen it, given my area, where I haven't seen the buses full or anything. So it may take all day to plan, and it's unfortunate. But when you have statistics like that, that needs to be considered as well.
Well, I think one of the reasons why it's said is, this may be the cynic in me, I'm all in favor of affordable housing, but it needs to be near public transportation,
Mhm.
not in the suburban cul-de-sacs where we live.
And so how do you change Howard County if that's the case? Because unless it is coming to a cul-de-sac or down Elliott Oaks Road to 108, how do you change that?
Well, I think
Or going up, towards 108.
we're about this. We're talking about those changes right now. And so I'm saying that if we advance an idea about missing middle housing in Newtown, say, you'll hear more from me about that. But it shouldn't be focused on having it near public transportation. There are other drivers and factors that would make it, that we ought to consider. But public transportation, I think we should just take away. It'd be nice if it's there, but not as a requirement to put affordable housing. Because
I agree.
97% of people have a car.
They either have a car or access to one, but I agree.
I'm gonna type that as
Proximity. Where did
to-
that number come from again when you guys said 97%? Because I'm
It's,
kind of on
it came from Department of Transport, Howard County's Department of Transportation. So unless that statistic is wrong, then
I mean, we could always question this, how good a response of the survey they got, because most of the families I know, just previous background, I used to work at BRHP for 6 years as a housing counselor. So to me, it's kind of like 50-50. But when we say have access to a car, does that mean that several household members in one household and they all sharing a car? You know what I mean? Because that would still create barriers. And to his point, wherever we can build affordable housing, like let's build it. But I would not just scratch, transportation, off the bus. Because me personally, I look for homes that are on the bus line, because I am a single mom. I have one vehicle, and I'm not trying to be a chauffeur for my young adults who are still living at home. They need to still be able to get to work and back and forth on their own. The bus transportation does suck. I agree with that. That's not the topic of this work group, but I still think it's important for those young adults who do not have a car, who still need to get back and forth.
I think Kelly put a better point on it. I was trying to be delicate about it, but it's code.
It's code, Tanika, for not in my backyard. So what we're saying is, and you're right, it's great to have public transportation when it's available, but don't not build affordable housing.
Oh yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And you
and I have talked
and
to
look, for all of that, like, listen, I've been on so many and I hear that too. Like, people don't want I get all of that, but
right.
that's why I was asking, like, well, where did that number come from? Because, like, I don't but yeah, but
You're
to
right.
this point, I agree. Like, at this point, like, we're so short on units. Like, let's just get it wherever we can. You know what I mean?
Yes, agreed. Agreed, but don't not do a project because it's not accessible to public transit.
Yeah, right. Let's not do a project because it's not accessible, but at the same time, I don't want to see every project not be accessible, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So
What I hear you guys trying to get to is back to some of the APFO issue that comes up in any development in Howard County and affordable housing, and how those requirements are being used to fight affordable housing by NIMBYs and things like that because of traffic or schools or whatever, and it's being used as a way to block affordable housing developments. So I think that's kind of what you're going around by one issue, but you could probably go through each and every one of those, and it's kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, it's the way that it's the public discourse. It's how it's discussed in public.
Yep.
It's not what it actually means, but that's the tool they use. You're right.
And the thing is, each one of these things is different. And affordable housing, I'll agree with you. Don't mistake the fact that if someone has lower income that they don't have a vehicle. But they typically have less vehicles. That's 100% true. And if given the opportunity to be on public transportation, I mean, it almost goes to your first comment that, a lot of the people, and I see this in a lot of jurisdictions, a lot of people in Howard County that work in Howard County can't afford to live in Howard County. The people that live in Howard County work elsewhere. So, and then you complain that you have a traffic problem, and it's kind of funny, So, a lot of the policies, if you do provide affordable housing in the right locations where the jobs are, and downtown Columbia, maybe, with apartments and multifamily, and where it does have a transportation network in place and jobs are available that fit the income demographics of the folks that live there, that you should be able to argue that perhaps a typical parking requirement that may be used against you in an AFO or against you in an application might want to be looked at a little differently.
One more senior housing thought, just apologies. It came late, often do. Senior housing projects now, because they're mostly available through conditional use, cannot be located on a road that's classified lower than a collector road or an arterial road, which means most of Howard County can't have affordable or can't have senior housing. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a fairly recent ZRA change from 2019.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't hear. You kind of went out a little bit. You're saying what about senior housing that changed?
In 2019, there was an amendment to the zoning code for conditional uses for for senior housing that required that they could only be located on roads that were classified as collector or arterial roads and higher. Now, most roads in Howard County are local roads, and that's where people want to live. We don't want to live on 95. We want to live a half a mile away from 95 on a neighborhood street, but you can't do that. So that's, if you're asking about solutions, that's the one I pick off right away.
We have about 25 minutes left to the end of the meeting, so I want to make sure we cover some of our other ones, which is we started talking about housing types, discussed missing middle a little bit, talked about housing, home ownership versus rental. So I want us to think about that a little bit, but also talk about accessibility. I know in particular, Tom Evans, you're representing a certain segment of the population who, even if they could afford any house they wanted in Howard County, they might not be able to find a house that meets their physical needs. So kind of talking a little bit about what kind of housing units are accessible, and what features need to be incorporated into housing to make sure that anyone can find a home that works for them. So I'm gonna kind of prepping on you for that, but invite the entire group.
Does everyone know what is meant by missing middle housing? Just wanted to make sure that was understood.
Quite sure.
Missing middle, do you want to?
Sure.
I like
so-
how you describe it.
Well, at which time? The missing middle housing is essentially, it's the type of housing that we used to build all the time until about 1950, when we started doing suburban development. So when you talk about missing middle housing, it's anywhere from an accessory dwelling unit in a small cottage or basement apartment in someone's home, townhomes, 6 garden apartments, 6-unit garden apartments, low-rise garden duplexes. It's the spectrum of housing typologies that we don't really build anymore, because now what we tend to build is large single-family detached homes, townhomes in our particular region, but those are a type of missing middle housing type for a lot of jurisdictions, and large multi-family units. So that's my understanding of missing middle housing. It's a term that has for a housing type that's always been around. It's just that we don't tend to build it as much anymore.
Yeah. It doesn't require as much large of a footprint as, say, just a single family detached home, or you might be able to get 2 or 3 units on the same footprint as a single family detached home. But depending upon where you're building it, you can build it in a way so that it fits within the character of whichever neighborhood it's located. So that helps inform what the unit types might be. So currently in the county, one of the little bit of the analysis that we did as we were preparing the general plan was we took a look at, well, where can some of these more diverse housing types be allowed to be built by right? And the majority of the county, the great majority of the county, only allows single-family detached homes by right. There's a much smaller area that will allow what's called a basically 2-family dwelling unit, but that's basically your duplex. So there's a smaller area in the county that might allow a duplex, and an even smaller area within the county that allows what's called multifamily development. And that's currently defined as 3 units or more. So any individual structure that allows 3 or more units is considered multifamily, and a very small percentage of the county allows that housing type by right.
There's some really
Okay.
good. Please, Matt.
Well, I was going to add one thing to the missing middle discussion, and that's a different definition than I've been familiar with in my 17 years of affordable housing. I was always told the missing middle is, and it might translate to the type of housing that you're describing from a price point, but it's always been because the low income housing tax credit program has always provided funding for stuff up to 60% AMI. Project-based vouchers take care of the 30% and below. 120% AMI and above generally can afford whatever they want. So the missing middle was the folks that are between that 60 and 120% of AMI, where there's really no programs to serve them. They don't have the income to be able to support the full market rate potential. And maybe what you're describing is the lack of product that even could be in there that they could afford. So it's that's where they're missing on everything.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding me. It is both a middle type of housing product designed for a middle income kind of bracket. And so the other typology that I didn't talk about is smaller starter homes, single family detached homes. You'll see those in cottage clusters. You'll see those in kind of smaller, like, I think we used to build 1,300 to 1,500 square foot homes, and nowadays 4,000 to 6,000 square foot is kind of the standard single family detached home. So it's also talking about that whole spectrum for that middle income. Thank you, Ned, for correcting me and correcting me on that one.
I don't know. I don't know that I'm correcting. I just was saying that's the way I've always heard it. And when they did change the tax credit program to allow 80% units, that was the first attempt to try to tackle the missing middle problem, even though they still had to average across those deals 60% and or below.
Yeah, I think for the sake of from a general plan perspective and a zoning perspective, you have to translate that into a housing type.
Yep.
Yeah.
Understood.
So I'm gonna, because I keep wanting to circle back to it, is that accessible housing. So I think this is, we didn't include it in this presentation, we can certainly, but we do have a sort of guidance document in the county for universal design. Some of those items that are included in universal design are requirements. Many of them are recommendations or options. Certain types of housing, like the conditional use, age-restricted adult housing, do have requirements to include elements from that list. But I think that's really as far as we go right now in the county in terms of requiring certain kind of housing that might meet disability needs. And when I talk about those kind of things, it's oftentimes like making sure you build a housing with a wider door so that someone who's wheelchair bound doesn't have to modify it in the future. Making sure you put in extra blocking in the walls so that you can put in grab bars. Making sure you have no step entry points, things like that are kind of standard features. And I know a lot of jurisdictions are starting to try to make sure their housing stock have elements of that. However, there is an added thing of the more you require, the more it costs to build. So now you're also affecting affordability. So, which is one of the reasons that we're talking about affordable and accessible in the same conversation here today. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts for types of accessible housing units that we don't have or that we might need to have, or typologies that might lend themselves well to addressing this need.
There's another program, I don't know much about it. I'm pretty familiar with universal design, but visitability, that program, that I think is like a universal design light, a lighter version. Are you familiar with the term? I think
it's generally first floor access is what's
Yeah.
considered visible. So if you're talking a townhouse unit, you at least give full access to the first floor and that, but they don't necessarily have to get the second floor. It's a requirement in a lot of funding sources to have a certain amount of units in whatever deal that happens to be funded to meet that visitability requirement. And sometimes it's like 25%.
And I would push back on the thought that it's more expensive. When properly planned, it should be net neutral within any developer's budget as long as it's planned up front. I think it becomes expensive when people are trying to retrofit and do redesigns, but if that's part of their original plan, I think the cost can be absorbed and can still maintain the affordability that is trying to be sought.
If you're in multifamily, yes. If you're building townhouses, no.
Yeah.
That's right. No, that's right. That's right. And that's fair.
Jess, combining two ideas, LIHU and universal design or the visitable. And I can't take credit for this. This is Steve Breeden's idea that he's been trying to peddle for years now. But he makes the point that we offer pilots to new multifamily projects, but we don't offer any kind of a similar program, a pilot program, to existing. And he thinks that there would be an audience for some sort of a program that would incentivize the owner of existing multifamily to create where they have no MIHU requirement today. Thinking of almost all of the units in Newtown have no MIHU. That in exchange for an LIHU or a DIHU or a combination of HUs, they would get some sort of a pilot program and effectively a reduction in their annual tax. So those are the rudiments of it, but that's an idea, not mine. But
Well, I need to follow up with Steve because we have it.
Oh.
So the House bill passed in this last session, and we are in the process of notifying all property owners of rental housing that they can do that. If they create affordable units within an existing community, they would be eligible to apply for a pilot.
I hope Steve knows.
I haven't told Steve, but I see Jackie on Thursday, so I will share. But we are doing that, and it's already approved. So it is a way to incentive or potentially in existing communities, create some affordable units. Now, goes back to Jackie's point and about accessibility. It's more expensive to create accessible and visible units in an existing community. But then, as she also said, for example, Enterprise demolishing Roz and Rise and rebuilding Legacy at Twin Rivers. There's so many of those. They were able then to create visitable units, accessible units. So, but still, if you create affordable units and maybe 10% of the units become accessible, putting in grab bars, putting in a roll-in shower, putting in alarms for people who are hearing impaired, putting in something for people who have visual impairments, it can be done, and the county can support efforts like that. So I will follow up with Steve.
And I would amend that bill
Uh-huh.
to include something called an SIHU. So if you are a senior at below an income level, then there are some units set aside for you. And you may also be disabled, so that perhaps it comes under the DIHU, but you can be a senior and not be disabled.
Sure. Understood.
And the accessible obviously applies to physically handicapped, where you need ramps or elevators or whatever.
Correct.
First floor units, but they're also mentally impaired as well. And they're capable of living sometimes on their own, but may need some part-time help, which then basically necessitates a unit for the caretaker. So either, I mentioned with Paul earlier, either 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartments, condos, or whatever, houses, so that there are room for perhaps 2 individuals and the third being the caretaker for the evening watch or whatever. So again, Paul mentioned they're not building 2- and 3-bedroom apartments or condos
But
anymore.
there are old ones around.
Yeah, there are old ones, and if there could be some tax incentive or set aside for those individuals, that'd be benefit.
I think that segues into kind of our last question and kind of chat about for just about 5 minutes or so. It is that talking about the actual tools that we use to use. I know we've talked about incentives. We talked about certain kinds of housing, particularly when you're having affordable housing caps. A lot of times, deed restrictions, the mechanism with which you're controlling the income level that's going in housing. So I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about those tools or what income factors should be considered as you're trying to actually develop those incentive programs or those regulatory systems.
Well, I spoke up earlier about how we need to get much below 60%, but I know it comes with more difficulties. These are folks who are earning less, have poorer credit, so there may need to be some additional help for them. Some credit counseling kind of help, some budgeting kind of help. Because you can't just ask someone who is making, far less than the median to suddenly start behaving like the median. They're going to fall apart at some point. So I think it would be useful to have programs that would help support them. But that's only moving the needle from 60 down to 50%. Get below 50% and the numbers get even tougher. I think you're right. I'm right on that.
Right. Deed restrictions are how the Moderate Income Housing Unit Program works. There's a deed restriction that restricts that unit's affordability and perpetuity. Low-income housing tax credit units have a deed restriction or a covenant for 40 years of affordability. What other types of things? One of the things that used to be done for homeownership was a shared equity model. The Housing Commission and the owner of the unit shared equity to make the home more affordable for the person purchasing the home. First mortgage companies don't allow that anymore, so that's been a challenge. We've talked to many lenders about creative ways to finance homeownership units for people of lower incomes. After 2008 crash, lenders are not really open to being a little riskier. They definitely want predictability. So there's been a little bit of a challenge there, but a shared equity model is something that could work for homeownership, affordable homeownership. There's always a need, of course, for more housing choice voucher support, type support, subsidy payments for people. So those are some things that would help create more affordable units or make it more affordable for the people who are living and working here. Energy efficiency, the department provides funding to several nonprofit partners to help people upgrade, fix things on their homes, upgrade their heating and air conditioning system, upgrade their roof or insulation to help make their homes more affordable. So we're doing some of those things to help keep people either in their homes or be able to improve affordability of their homes. But there's probably other things that other jurisdictions or places are doing.
Any thoughts from our online crowd? Before I close out our discussion session, I know we had some prompting questions, but I wanted to just open the floor for any other items that have been percolating in anyone's minds that they want to bring out to the group and have some discussion. Paul, I'm gonna wait for those. So
I told you.
for online, and then Paul is chomping at the bit after that. Going once, and twice, and it's hard to get to the unmute button. All right, Paul, you're on the floor.
So HOCO by Design has couple of special focus areas attached as an appendix. Gateway was one, now it's going to be primary. But Newtown is still a focus area. And, I think we'd be neglecting our duties here to not discuss what might be done in Newtown to improve affordability. Lots of what is affordable in Howard County is already in Newtown. So I'm not overlooking that. But, if somehow we could incentivize, I'm not picking on Harper's Forest, but those are older garden walk-up apartments. Typically 3, sometimes 4 stories. So if you could simply add another level to it, make it a 5-story building by conferring on them additional density, and then in exchange we get back 10 to 15 to 20% MIHUs. That'd be a way to do it, to create more affordable housing where there is existing affordable housing, but be upgraded, but that we get some deed restricted units out of it. I don't know how many are in Harper's Forest, but let's say 500. So if it suddenly becomes 600, of which 60 would become MIHU or some combination of D or L or S or whatever we want to do. I think we're missing an opportunity if we don't look at the existing multifamily ground in and ask ourselves, what if we upzone some or all of it? What would we get? What would it look like?
Paul, when you're talking about that, are you talking about just putting 2 stories on top, or are you talking about a scrape and redevelopment?
Scrape and redevelop. I want to make it,
because the 2 stories on top ain't so easy. The scrape and redevelopment, isn't so easy either.
Yeah, I want to motivate the owner to see the value in tearing down his existing income producing property and redevelop it into a better income producing property.
Are there any concerns with a lot of those properties kind of become naturally occurring affordable properties? I don't know if there's any issues with kind of losing that stock supply.
I think that's what we got to tune our ears for. We got to figure out, all right, what is there to now, and try not to displace them. In some ways, HUD does that when they do when you do a Section 8 deal.
You have to do relocation.
You have
You
to
have to
do
do a
relo-
relocation
relocation.
plan.
You've got to have non-displacement. You've got to say, we're happy you're here. We're going to move you and build a new one and bring you back.
Very, very, very expensive.
Yeah, I know, because I'm helping to pay for it.
I know. And I underestimated what I thought it would cost when we first did it. It's like,
Good.
I thought I had it covered. I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, but I guess not.
Okay, I am not complaining. You are killing it. You've got 3 jobs underway. I'm thrilled.
So with 4 minutes left, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, I'm gonna ask Lisa to jump to the next slide. We're obviously all the topics we discussed today are gonna continue to bring it. Oh, you went one too far. Thanks. There you go. Is just a reminder that next meeting, we touched on it a little bit, but we're gonna kind of have a brief presentation overview about the adequate public facilities ordinance, the chart, particularly focusing on the affordable housing set aside that was put into the most recently adopted one. Some of the questions that you're going to be asked to discuss for our next meeting is how best we can use that set aside. We're going to kind of talk about the historical impact of the allocation charts and the APO on development. We're going to ask you guys a little bit to start thinking about development incentives. In our general plan, you'll notice there's been discussion about different types of development incentives that should be considered. Things like density bonuses, we want to tap your brains and experience for what other jurisdictions might be doing. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about how to geographically target areas that currently have few affordable housing options where we want to encourage more types of affordable housing product to be located there. Things that have been discussed previously are things like putting in an overlay for affordable housing types. And kind of making sure we understand where there are current low concentrations of income restricted or lower cost housing. So that's just kind of a primer, so you guys know what's coming up. Lisa, next slide, please. We have been taking notes as this meeting goes down in terms of if there's other information or data requests that you want from us. So we'll try to pull that together for you based on this conversation. As you're thinking of this, you know, you go home, you fall asleep at night, you're haunted by the questions that were raised today.
Intrigued.
Intrigued, there you go.
Yeah.
Much better spin. And you have questions and you want, gosh, I wish I knew more. Let us know, send it an email, and we'll try to pull that information for you. And that's when I'm also going to pitch we put together a virtual binder. It's located on the website. It should have been emailed to you as well. So a lot of information in there. I do not anticipate you'll be able to read it all. I think it's well over 2,000 pages worth of content, but we wanted to put one location together for you guys to access a lot of data and information. As you're looking through it, as you're skimming, let us know. We can add to it more. And I'll try to provide a highlight for next time about what was also in that packet. But we have the most recent rental housing survey. We have links to the general plan, the housing opportunities master plan. For next week in particular, we have the locations of our MIHUs, both our rental and our home ownership throughout the county. So you can start seeing where those are actually located geographically. So this is just kind of a precursor for our next steps.
Is your work on activity centers advanced enough to share with us?
In terms of like proposing new rezonings and things.
Right.
It'll be part of the comprehensive rezoning process.
Okay.
And that timeline is still being figured out.
Okay, because I'm thinking, you know, if we're going to get 300 affordable units a year, we're going to have to find some multifamily ground, and activity centers look to be it.
And they're pretty well defined geographically in the HOCO by design right now. We
Yeah,
kind
I
of know
understand.
where our activity centers are.
But I was hoping that you guys would have done some groundwork.
I think as we get through the Gateway Master Planning process, right, that's the regional activity center, the biggest one. There will be some recommendations for zoning that come out of that master planning process. Yeah, I think it will.
We can't pick them off one at a time. We're going to have to get 100 at a time.
Yes. There's always background things, but it's not quite sausage ready. We're
Okay.
gonna invite you into the sausage
Just-
factory.
Eager.
All right, so we finally hit 5 o'clock. I really appreciate everyone's time. Right now we have our scheduled times that were based on everyone's input in the survey. I know some of you, this is a very difficult time frame. I know some people were not able to attend this. Unfortunately, we are dealing with the factor that all of you are so busy and you do such important work that none of your schedules align with each other. But if there is a consensus on the group that you would like to look at other meeting times or optional meeting times that were thrown in, please voice that. Be respectful of the Open Meetings Act that we cannot converse via email back and forth as a whole group. But if you want to propose additional times, we can go back to the group and I can ask for input from the group on that. But unless we hear that from a majority, I think unfortunately these are the kind of times that best work for the majority of the group. And I do apologize if that creates conflicts for anyone. All right. Thank you all so much for your time. Everyone travel safely. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.